There is a particular kind of silence that settles into a hotel lobby just after 9 in the evening. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a space holding its breath between the noise of arrival and the privacy of night. The day guests have retreated to their rooms. The dinner crowd has dispersed. What remains is the slow, deliberate rhythm of a well-run property in its quiet hours. A lobby attendant refreshing the central flower arrangement, a bartender wiping down the counter with the unhurried concentration of someone who has made peace with the late shift, the soft sound of the ventilation system doing its invisible and essential work. Eleanor Voss had always loved this hour in a hotel. She had stood inside it more times than she could reasonably count, in properties from Charleston to Charlotte to Chattanooga, sometimes in the lobby itself, sometimes through the long windows of a manager's office, watching the space breathe. She loved what this hour told you about a place, whether the staff moved with ease or tension, whether small repairs were made tonight or postponed until tomorrow, whether the lobby felt like a home at rest or a stage set waiting for the next performance. The lobby of the Callaway Grand Charleston was telling her tonight what it usually told her, that it was doing well. The flowers were dahlias and dried grasses, right for October, right for this particular low-country light. The young man at the concierge desk had the quality Eleanor had always prized above efficiency. He actually looked at the person standing in front of him, rather than through them. The bar smelled of citrus and clean wood. The stone floor held its warmth from the afternoon sun in the way that good stone does, not aggressively, not insistently, but with the patient steadiness of something built to last. She had chosen that stone in 1997 from a quarry in Portugal, selected from a sample book the size of a small coffee table that a supplier had carried into a conference room in Savannah and laid open on the floor for her inspection. She had knelt on the carpet in her good suit and pressed her palm against 6 different samples until she found the one with the right weight, the color of sand that has been rained on and dried again, the color of something permanent and unhurried. She had been 40 years old. She had known exactly what she was building. Eleanor stood now in the east corridor of the property she had built, her overnight bag at her feet, and looked down at her phone. "Mom, just sleep in the lobby, LOL. They have really nice couches." The message was from Nathan, her son, 38 years old, born on a Tuesday in October, not unlike this one, in a hospital she had driven herself to because Thomas was on a job site in Augusta, and she had not wanted to wait. Eleanor read the message twice. Then she placed the phone back in the pocket of her coat. She looked up at the corridor, at the coffered ceiling she had specified, at the sconces she had selected from a catalog in a room that no longer existed, at the runner beneath her feet, whose pattern she had argued for against a designer who had wanted something more contemporary. And she felt, in the specific way she had always felt things that mattered, not in the chest, but behind the sternum, a deep and recognizable settling. Not anger, not grief. The particular calm of a woman who has been waiting for a moment to arrive, and finds, now that it has, that she is completely ready. She raised her eyes to the night manager's desk, where a young woman, Eleanor did not yet know her name was Priya, was speaking quietly into a phone. Beyond the desk, through the wide glass panels of the south-facing wall, the Cooper River lay flat and dark and silver at its edges, where the hotel's exterior lights touched the water. Eleanor had chosen that sightline in 1996, standing on a cleared lot with a set of architectural drawings and a vision that the project manager standing beside her had described, in a tone meant to be encouraging, as ambitious. She had looked at him the way she looked at things she had already decided about, and she had said, "The view is the product." And then she had turned back to the drawings. She looked at the river now for a long moment. Then she waited. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Margaret Reed. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. To understand what happened at the Callaway Grand that Thursday evening in October, and what continued to happen through the long weekend that followed, you have to understand who Eleanor Voss was, not who her family thought she was, who she actually was. She was born Eleanor May Callaway in 1957, saw the youngest child of a hotel maintenance worker and a seamstress in a neighborhood of Savannah that the tourist maps did not include. Her father, Henry, had spent 31 years servicing the plumbing and electrical systems of luxury hotels along the Georgia coast, hotels that employed him through service entrances and paid him in cash that was always, somehow, slightly less than it should have been. He was a meticulous man, careful with tools and careful with words, and he had taught Eleanor two things by example, rather than instruction: that the quality of a thing is always visible to anyone who knows where to look, and that the people who build and maintain beautiful spaces are rarely given credit for the beauty they create. Her mother, Ruth Callaway, she had worked as a seamstress and presser for a hotel laundry service for 24 years. She had pressed tablecloths at midnight so that guests who would never learn her name could sit down to a perfect breakfast. She had done it without complaint, which Eleanor had understood, even as a small child watching from the kitchen doorway, not as resignation, but as a particular form of dignity. The dignity of a woman who knows her value exists regardless of whether anyone has bothered to name it. Eleanor had studied hospitality management at Georgia State on a partial scholarship and worked every weekend at a hotel front desk in Buckhead, where she learned the public-facing side of an industry she already knew from behind the service doors. She was methodical and attentive, and possessed of a quality that her supervisor at the time had described, not quite understanding what he was seeing, as an unusual feel for how a place should work. What he was seeing was a woman who had grown up watching buildings from the inside, who understood a property not as a setting, but as a system, of labor, of relationships, of countless invisible decisions that added up, over time, to something a guest might describe as simply nice. She married Thomas Voss at 28. He was a civil engineer from Augusta, steady, precise, and possessed of the one quality Eleanor had never stopped being grateful for: a complete absence of the need to diminish her in order to feel adequate himself. He had read every contract she ever handed him. He had asked every question she had already considered. He had said yes when the calculus was right and pushed back when it wasn't. And in 31 years of marriage, he had never once made her feel that her ambition was a thing she was supposed to manage carefully for the comfort of the room. The Callaway Group had begun in 1988 with a single extended stay property on the outskirts of Savannah, purchased with 10 years of savings, a small inheritance from Ruth, and a loan from a bank that had initially declined and then reconsidered when Eleanor showed up for the second meeting with documentation no one had expected her to have prepared. She had named the company for her mother's maiden name, not for nostalgia, though the sentiment was present, but because Ruth Callaway had spent her life making things beautiful for people who never thanked her. And Eleanor thought the least she could do was put that name on something that lasted. By the time Nathan was born, the group had 3 properties. By his middle school years, 6. By the time he graduated college, 12. And Eleanor had quietly restructured the entire corporate entity into a trust administered by her attorney and longtime advisor, Gerald Whitmore, moving her name off every public-facing document with the deliberateness of a woman who had watched what happened to women whose wealth became visible to the wrong people at the wrong time. Thomas had known everything, always. He had been her partner in the most complete sense. Not the architect of what she built, but the person who held it steady while she built it. She was who read every document and asked every question, and understood that his role in the enterprise was not diminished by the fact that the enterprise was hers. When Thomas died of a stroke in the spring of 2019, Nathan had flown home from Seattle. He had sat with her through the arrangements and the visitors and the particular exhaustion of those first weeks. He had called every day for the first month, and then, gradually, he had called less often. And then Simone had begun calling instead. Nathan Voss was, by most external measures, a successful man. He ran a mid-market commercial real estate consulting firm in Seattle that Eleanor had helped capitalize at 29, with what she had described at the time as a loan from savings, a characterization that Nathan had not examined, because examining it would have required asking questions that might have produced answers that complicated his understanding of his own position in the world. The firm did well. Nathan was good at his work, had his father's precision with structure, and something of his mother's instinct for what a space could become, though he applied these gifts in service of other people's portfolios rather than his own. He had married Simone Archer at 34 in a ceremony that cost Eleanor $340,000, a figure she had provided without being asked, because Nathan had come to her quietly with the numbers, and she had seen in his face the familiar conflict between wanting to give Simone everything and not quite having the resources to do it unassisted. She had written the check. She had attended the wedding in the third row, behind Simone's parents and two of Simone's college friends, because Simone had explained, with the particular breezy confidence of a woman who has already decided what the explanation is and requires only its delivery, that the front rows were reserved for immediate family. And since Eleanor was the only immediate family on Nathan's side, it had been a matter of optics. Eleanor had sat in the third row. She had smiled for every photograph. Simone was 34. She ran a lifestyle brand called Simone at Home, Instagram, a podcast she updated inconsistently, and a sponsored partnership with a meal kit company that paid her a flat monthly retainer to feature their products in a kitchen Eleanor had helped furnish, without either Simone or Nathan having thought to mention where the furnishing money came from. She was not stupid. Eleanor had never made the mistake of underestimating Simone's intelligence. It was, in fact, one of the things that made Simone's particular variety of ambition more interesting to observe than the straightforward kind. Simone understood value. She understood leverage. She understood, with the instinctive accuracy of a very practical woman, that Eleanor Voss was a resource not yet fully optimized. The problem was that she had assessed Eleanor's value incorrectly, categorized her as helpful elderly woman with a comfortable savings account, which was precisely what Eleanor had allowed her to see. In the 4 years since Thomas's death, Simone had made a series of small, confident rearrangements in the architecture of Eleanor's family life. The Sunday phone calls had migrated gradually from Nathan's voice to Simone's, arriving with a warmth Eleanor recognized as practiced, bright, slightly proprietary, the tone of a woman managing an asset while performing affection. The holiday visits had grown shorter and more logistically complicated, with Eleanor increasingly positioned as a guest in the life of her own family rather than a participant in it. Decisions were made and announced. Plans were finalized before Eleanor was consulted. Nathan, when she spoke directly to him about things that mattered, had the look of a man receiving information he would not be able to act on, not because he didn't care, but because acting on it would require a kind of friction he had decided, somewhere along the way, seen was not worth the cost. At Easter last year, Simone had redirected a dinner conversation with the fluid efficiency of a woman who had practiced the move. Eleanor had been in the middle of a story Nathan had asked for, something about the early days of the business, one of the genuinely funny disasters that Thomas had always loved to hear retold. When Simone had leaned forward and said, brightly and without apparent malice, "Oh, but show Mom the Portugal photos, Nathan. I want her to see the ones from the market." And just like that, the moment was gone, absorbed into a phone screen and a slideshow of Lisbon, and Eleanor had looked at her son, who was looking at the phone, and had understood something she had been approaching slowly for a long time. He didn't know, and he didn't know he didn't know, which was, don't she had decided that night in the drive back to Savannah, the more consequential of those two facts. The group text announcing the Charleston trip had arrived on a Sunday morning in September. Eleanor had read it at her kitchen table over her first coffee, with Thomas's garden visible through the window, and the particular quiet of a house that has been lived in with care for a very long time. Hey everyone! We've booked the Callaway Grand for the October long weekend. Nathan has a conference nearby, and we figured why not make it a family thing? Lily is obsessed with Charleston history. We'll be there Thursday through Sunday. Mom, we'd love for you to join if you're up for the travel. The hotel is gorgeous. You'll love it. Eleanor had read it twice, slowly. The hotel is gorgeous. You'll love it. She had set her coffee down. She had looked at the garden, the wisteria Thomas had planted along the fence in 1994, that she kept trimmed to exactly the width he had specified, because she liked maintaining the things he had built. She had thought about a conference room in Savannah in 1997, where she had laid a Portuguese stone sample on the floor and pressed her palm against it to feel the weight of the decision she was making. Then she had typed back, simply, "I'd love to come. I'll handle my own reservation." She did not mention that handling her own reservation at the Callaway Grand involved a phone call to Gerald Whitmore that lasted approximately 90 seconds. She booked a standard king on the 4th floor. Nothing conspicuous. Nothing that would require explanation. Under the name Eleanor Voss, the same as anyone else. Now she had stayed at this property 43 times since it opened. This would be the first time she arrived as a guest who was not supposed to know the building. She found, folding a cardigan into her bag, that she was looking forward to it in a specific and deliberate way. The drive from Savannah to Charleston had the particular quality of a drive made many times in different emotional conditions, familiar enough to allow thinking, long enough to be useful. Eleanor listened to an audiobook she had read once in hardcover and was revisiting now for the particular pleasure of argument. A History of the American Hospitality Industry, whose author had several things wrong about the economics of independent boutique properties in the post-2008 market, but got the human texture of the industry exactly right. The best hotels, the author wrote, operated on the principle of invisible effort. All the labor of creating ease hidden so thoroughly that the ease felt like the world's natural condition, rather than someone's carefully maintained work. Eleanor had spent 35 years hiding her effort. She understood the principle from the inside. She stopped once for gas on the outskirts of Walterboro. The attendant was a young man running on very little sleep, filling her tank with the focused disengagement of someone who has been doing something for longer than the shift should last. Eleanor tipped him well and wished him a good afternoon, the way she always did, not because anyone was watching, but because her mother had done it and her mother's mother had done it, and it was the kind of practice that costs nothing and accumulates into something you cannot quite name, but can always feel. She arrived at the Callaway Grand at 3:45. The valet who opened her car door had a quality Eleanor recognized immediately and had always valued over efficiency in any hospitality context. He was actually present. Not present as in standing there, but present as in genuinely attending. He took her bag with the care that the property's training manual, written by Eleanor in 2001 and updated twice since, most recently by a general manager she trusted, had always described as the guest's ease is the purpose of the work. She would learn before the weekend was over that his name was Marcus and that he had been with the property for 3 years and had a daughter 8 years old, the same age as Lily, who also found history more interesting than most adults gave her credit for. The lobby received her the way it always had, with the cool stone floor and the late afternoon light from the river-facing windows and the October dahlias on the central arrangement table. Eleanor crossed to the front desk, gave her name, collected her keycard, and went upstairs. She did not ask to see the manager, not yet. She was not ready for that conversation yet. She had learned, over 4 decades of very patient work, that the timing of a conversation was often more important than the conversation itself. Her room was on the 4th floor, river-facing, with a window she had specified in the original design for exactly this view. The Cooper River at late afternoon, when the light came in low and turned the water the color of hammered pewter. She had argued with the original architect about the window placement, about the degree of angle, about whether the southern exposure would make the rooms too warm in summer. And she had been right, and he had eventually acknowledged it, which was as close to an apology as architects in her experience ever came. Sao she unpacked with the methodical calm she brought to most practical things. Clothes hung, toiletries arranged on the bathroom counter in the order she used them. The folder from her glove compartment placed in the room safe with her usual combination. She changed into a quieter cardigan and went downstairs to wait. She ordered tea at the bar and chose a seat where she could see the full lobby entrance. This was an old habit, the instinct to understand a room before becoming part of it, to read the traffic patterns and the quality of attention, to know what a space was doing before it knew it was being observed. What the Callaway Grand was doing, at 5:15 on a Thursday afternoon in October, was exactly what it was supposed to be doing. The check-in line moved without pressure. The bar had 4 guests who looked comfortable rather than waiting. A couple near the windows was being attended to by a staff member who had, Eleanor noticed, leaned slightly toward them rather than standing formally upright. The body language of someone trained not just to serve, but to put at ease. She was on her second cup of tea when she heard Lily. The sound of her granddaughter arrived before the sight of her. A bright, unceremonious grandma, from the direction of the main entrance that carried across the lobby without apology, the way children announce themselves when they have not yet been taught that the world sometimes prefers them smaller. Eleanor was already standing by the time the small body reached her, arms wide open. She held Lily for a long moment. Lily was 8 years old and had Eleanor's father's eyes, wide set, quietly attentive, the kind that noticed things the room assumed weren't being noticed. She smelled of sunscreen and river air and whatever historic district landmark she had most recently pressed her nose against. "We saw a house built in 1790, Lily said, without preamble. "It's still standing. Things that are well built tend to last," Eleanor told her. Lily pulled back just far enough to look at her. "Why do the houses here face sideways?" "The lots were taxed by the width that faced the street," Eleanor said, "so the builders turned the houses to show as little frontage as possible." Lily's expression shifted into the particular gravity she wore when encountering a principal for the first time. "That's sneaky. That's practical," Eleanor said. "Sometimes they look the same." Lily considered this the way she considered most things, seriously, as though filing it somewhere specific for later use. Eleanor watched her and felt, in the warm and reliable way she always felt in this child's presence, that the world had not run out of people worth paying careful attention to. Nathan arrived beside them a moment later, phone in hand, pocketing it as he registered the scene. He hugged his mother, briefly, genuinely, the hug of a person who means something and is also navigating toward the next item on the day's list. He asked if the drive had been fine. She said it was fine. He said the morning conference session had been interesting. She said that was good. Simone arrived with the timing of someone who has calibrated her entrance. She was wearing a linen blazer and earrings that caught the lobby light in a way that Eleanor recognized as deliberate. Not vanity precisely, but the considered management of impression, which was something different. She said Eleanor's name with the warmth she always brought to it, bright and slightly proprietary, the tone of a woman who has established how a relationship works and expects the established terms to hold. "You look rested," Simone said. "Was the drive not too much?" "The drive was lovely," Eleanor said. "The fall color along the highway is worth it this time of year." Simone had already turned to assess the lobby with the evaluating eye of someone determining whether a place met the standard she intended to present to her followers. Her gaze moved from the chandelier to the floral arrangement, to the bar setup to the view through the south-facing windows. "It's beautiful," she said, the satisfaction in her voice carrying the particular quality of someone who has chosen well and knows it. "Much better than I expected for a property this size." "It's a wonderful hotel," Eleanor agreed. "Have you stayed here before?" Simone asked, the question fractionally more interested than casual. "Once or twice," Eleanor said. Though dinner was at a restaurant 2 blocks north that Simone had researched and reserved, a place with a short, confident menu and a dining room that made good use of the building's original brick. The food was excellent. Eleanor had been introduced to the chef at a local hospitality event 3 years prior, and thought well of him then. The wine list was thoughtful, organized by region rather than variety, which she appreciated. Lily ate everything on her plate and talked for most of the meal with the completeness of a person who has been storing observations all day and has finally found an audience patient enough to receive them. She moved from the construction of the single houses to the question of how you build something on a peninsula surrounded by water. Doesn't it just sink? To what she had read in her school project about the harbor fort, which she was determined to visit before Sunday. Eleanor asked questions and listened to the answers with the full weight of her attention, which was the easiest gift she had to give her granddaughter, and the one that Lily seemed, on some instinctive level, to recognize as real. Across the table, Nathan was on his phone discussing conference logistics with a colleague he had texted into joining them for dessert. Simone was composing something with the efficient concentration of a woman managing content on a deadline. "Grandma," Lily said at one point, lowering her voice slightly in the manner of someone sharing something important. "Did you know this city is one of the oldest in the country?" "One of the oldest," Eleanor confirmed. "And people just live there," Lily said, meaning the historic houses. "In houses that old, don't they feel weird about it?" "I think they feel situated," Eleanor said, "like they know where they are." Lily turned this over. "I'd like to feel situated," she decided. "I know," Eleanor said. "I think you will." That night, back in her fourth-floor room, with the lights of the city reflected in the dark river below, Eleanor sat in the chair by the window for a long time after she should have slept. She thought about her mother pressing tablecloths in the small hours. She thought about the stone sample on the conference room floor. She thought about Nathan's hug and Lily's eyes, and the way Simone had assessed the lobby of the Callaway Grand and pronounced it better than expected. The way you pronounce a thing better than expected when you have forgotten, or never known, to ask who built it. She turned off the light. She slept the sleep of a woman who has made her decisions and is simply waiting for events to catch up. Simone arrived at the breakfast table the next morning with her sunglasses still on, the posture of a woman occupied with something she had not yet decided to share. Eleanor ordered tea and eggs and watched the morning light come off the river, which at 8 o'clock had the flat pewter quality of something not yet warmed. "I need to talk to you about something," Simone said, without looking up from her phone. "Of course," Eleanor said. Simone set the phone down. She removed her sunglasses and folded them with the precision of someone staging a moment. The pause before the sentence, the arrangement of objects that signals this is now a different kind of conversation. Her expression had the careful brightness of a woman delivering news she has decided is reasonable and requires only reception. "So there's been a small change of plans," she said. "Nathan's colleagues from the Seattle office, two couples, lovely people, very spontaneous, have decided to join us for the rest of the weekend." A pause that did its work. "The thing is, they need rooms, and the hotel is quite full. And we've looked at the options, and—" She let the sentence sit where it was. "They're going to need your room," she said, "just for the Saturday and Sunday nights. There's apparently some availability in the annex building. It's still on the property, a short walk. Or, honestly, with the sitting area off Nathan's conference suite, there's the option of—" She did not finish that sentence. She left it where she had placed it, in the space between sitting area and a couple of nights, which was where people left things they preferred not to say directly. Eleanor looked at her. She looked at her with the particular expression she reserved for moments that required full and accurate understanding before any response was formed. The expression of a woman reviewing what has just been said, what has not been said, and what the gap between them reveals. "I see," Eleanor said. "It's just logistics," Simone said. The brightness in her voice indicated the topic was already resolved. "You understand." "I understand perfectly," Eleanor said. She finished her tea. She folded her napkin. She excused herself with the measured courtesy of a woman who has decided what she is going to do next and sees no need to announce it. She went back to her room. She sat in the chair by the window. She looked at the Cooper River, which she had chosen to be visible from exactly this angle, in this light, at this hour, 26 years ago. Then she picked up her phone. Not to call Nathan, Statu, who had texted by then. The lobby lounge is super comfortable, if it's just for a couple nights LOL. With the small laughing modifier that does the work of making a dismissal sound like something else. Not to call Simone. Not to call the front desk, or the manager, or anyone in the building who would have known her voice the moment she spoke. A different contact. One she had known by heart since 1994. "Gerald," she said when he answered. "Always," Gerald Whitmore said. "What's happening, Eleanor?" She looked at the river. She looked at her son's text one more time. "Mom just sleep in the lobby, lol. They have really nice couches." And she thought about her mother pressing tablecloths at midnight. She thought about the stone sample on the floor. She thought about Lily at the dinner table saying, "I'd like to feel situated," in the careful, serious voice of a child who means every word she says. "My son has suggested I sleep in the lobby," she said. "I think it's time to begin." A brief silence. Then Gerald's voice, level and prepared. "What do you need first?" Eleanor set her hand flat on the arm of the chair. Below her, 20 feet down through the floors of the building she had built, the morning was moving through the lobby at its proper pace. Guests arriving for breakfast, the concierge fielding a question about the harbor ferry, the stone floor receiving all of it with the patient warmth of something that has been here longer than anyone standing on it. "Nothing yet," she said. "Let the morning develop. I want to see how far they'll go." And then, she looked at the river. "And then," Eleanor said, "I'll tell the manager who I am." The annex building sat at the rear of the Callaway Grands property, connected to the main hotel by a covered walkway that ran along the garden path. A path Eleanor had designed with the specific intention that guests using it would feel they were moving through something, not merely between 2 points. Lemon trees and terracotta pots, oyster shell gravel underfoot. The low sound of the fountain she had commissioned from a sculptor in Athens, Georgia, who had been 24 years old and needed the work, and produced something that still, 20 years later, made people stop walking. She had moved her bags herself, Friday morning, while Nathan was in his first conference session, and Lily was at breakfast, and Simone was on a video call in the penthouse suite with her phone propped against a champagne flute. And a member of the housekeeping staff had offered to help the moment he saw her in the corridor. Eleanor had thanked him and told him she had it. She had carried one bag in each hand down the corridor, through the walkway, past the lemon trees and the fountain, and into the annex building, which was a perfectly adequate building, well-maintained, appropriately appointed, exactly as she had specified when she approved the renovation 8 years ago. It was also, undeniably, not the fourth-floor river-facing room she had booked and paid for. The annex windows faced the garden rather than the water. The ceilings were lower. The light came in later and left earlier. Eleanor set her bags down in the center of the room and stood for a moment, taking full inventory of where she was and what it meant that she was here. Then she opened the room safe, entered her combination, and placed the folder inside. She changed her blouse. She went to the desk by the window and opened her laptop. Gerald had sent 3 documents overnight. She reviewed them in order, the way she reviewed everything, start to finish, nothing skimmed, every number confirmed against her own memory before she accepted it as settled. When she was done, she closed the laptop and looked out at the garden, where a groundskeeper she did not recognize was raking the oyster shell path into the precise herringbone pattern she had specified in the property's landscape manual. He was doing it correctly, with the unhurried attention of someone who understood that the work mattered whether or not anyone was watching. She watched him for a moment. Then she went to meet her granddaughter. The Seattle colleagues arrived at 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon in a rental SUV that was too large for the city's historic district streets, and which the valet managed with the diplomatic competence Eleanor had always admired in good parking staff. There were 4 of them, Brad and Courtney Hollis, and Ryan and Jessica Park. They were all somewhere in their mid-30s, dressed with the particular casual confidence of people who have recently learned to spend money on clothing and are still at the stage where they want that to be noticed. Brad Hollis was the reason Nathan had invited them. He was a potential partner in the consulting firm, the kind of man who talked about leverage and scalability and relationship capital in the cadences of someone who had listened to a lot of podcasts and absorbed their vocabulary without always absorbing the thinking beneath it. He had a loud laugh that arrived a half second before whatever had caused it, and a habit of touching people on the arm when he spoke to them, as if physical contact were a form of emphasis. Courtney Hollis managed Brad's impression of her with the same diligence that Simone managed her own, which was presumably why Simone had immediately identified her as someone worth knowing. By 4 o'clock, they were on the outdoor terrace sharing a bottle of something expensive and talking in the interlocking rhythm of two women who have decided to perform the friendship before it has actually formed. Eleanor observed this from the library off the main lobby, where she was reading a book she had brought from Savannah and drinking the hotel's afternoon tea service, which was, she noted with professional satisfaction, being executed correctly. The right temperature, the right sequence, the cups warmed before the pour. Ryan Park had found her there within the first hour of his arrival. He had come in looking for a quiet corner to take a work call and had stopped when he saw her, with the faint awkwardness of a man who has walked into what he didn't expect. "Sorry, didn't realize anyone was in here. I can find another, please," Eleanor had said, gesturing to the arrangement of chairs on the far side of the room. "It's a good room for calls. The walls are thick." He had thanked her and made his call in the far corner, and when he finished, he had paused on his way out and looked at the room. The shelving, the fireplace, the proportions of the ceiling, with the expression of someone who appreciated a well-made space. "This is a beautiful hotel," he had said, not performing it, just saying it, the way people say things they actually mean. "It is," Eleanor had agreed. He had nodded, something slightly curious in his expression, the look of a person who has registered a small discrepancy they haven't yet named, and then excused himself. Eleanor watched him go and turned back to her book. The room reassignment had not been acknowledged formally by anyone. It was the kind of thing that, in this family, happened by elision, the decision made, the fact established, the conversation that might have addressed it quietly, avoided by everyone who would have found it uncomfortable to have. Simone had sent Eleanor a text Friday morning that read, "The annex is apparently really charming, very private and garden-facing. I think you might actually prefer it." And that had been the full extent of the acknowledgement. Nathan had not texted at all. Eleanor had understood, a long time ago, not that Nathan's silences were not indifference exactly, but something more complicated and perhaps more troubling. The silence of a man who has learned that remaining quiet costs him nothing in the short term and has not yet been required to calculate the long-term balance. Thomas had never been silent about the things that mattered. He had sometimes been wrong, and said so, and been wrong again, and said so again, but the accounting had always been current. Nathan settled his debts by not incurring them, which was not, Eleanor had come to understand, the same thing as honesty. She had dinner with the group that evening at the hotel's main restaurant. Simone had made the reservation, a long table on the terrace overlooking the river, the kind of reservation that photographed well, which Eleanor suspected was among its primary qualifications. The table seated 8. Eleanor was placed at the far end, beside Lily, which was where she would have chosen to sit in any case, but which she noted had not been chosen for that reason. The seating arrangement at a table tells you everything about who arranged it and what they were thinking when they did. Simone sat beside Brad Hollis at the center of the table, which was the social center as much as the physical one. Nathan sat across from Ryan Park, the two men already moving through the preliminary language of a business relationship that each wanted to establish on favorable terms. Jessica Park was between Courtney and Nathan, laughing at something with the ease of someone who had decided in the first hour that this weekend was going to be fun. At the far end, Eleanor and Lily ate their food and talked about the harbor. "The ferry tomorrow," Lily said. "You said you'd see." "I made a call this morning," Eleanor said. "There are seats on the 10 o'clock." Lily looked at her with the bright intensity of a child receiving information she had been waiting for. "Really? Really? Will Mom come?" Eleanor looked down the long table at Simone, who was laughing at something Brad had said, her hand on his arm in the gesture she used when she wanted someone to feel attended to. "I'm not sure," Eleanor said carefully, "but you and I will go." Lily accepted this with the equanimity of a child who has learned, in 8 years, to understand which commitments are reliable and which require negotiation. "Okay," she said. Then, "Grandma, why did we have to move rooms?" The question arrived, as Lily's questions always did. Without preamble or performance, Eleanor set down her fork. "The other guests needed the space," she said. "Lily considered this. But you were already there." "I was." "That doesn't seem fair." "No," Eleanor agreed. "It doesn't particularly." Lily looked down the table, her father's eyes making the survey with quiet attention. Then she looked back at Eleanor. "Do you mind?" she asked. "Really?" Eleanor looked at her granddaughter for a moment. At the wide-set eyes and the serious mouth and the quality of attention that asked real questions and waited for real answers. "No," she said, "I don't mind at all." And then, because Lily deserved more than a partial truth, because I know something they don't. And knowing changes how everything feels. Lily looked at her steadily, the way she looked at things she was filing for later. "What do you know?" she asked. "A few things," Eleanor said. "I'll tell you some of them when you're a little older." Lily appeared to accept this, with the dignity of a child who has been given an honest answer, even if not a complete one. She turned back to her food. After a moment she said, "The house that was built in 1790 is still standing." "It is, because it was built well." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Exactly that." She slept better that night than she had expected to, which was not unusual. Eleanor had learned, in the long, quiet years of building something large and keeping it mostly invisible, that sleep was a professional skill as much as a personal one, that the ability to rest in the middle of a long undertaking was not indifference to the undertaking, but its opposite, why the discipline of a person who understood that what she needed most, in the days before a decision landed, was to be clear-headed when it did. She was up at 6. She made the coffee the annex room's machine produced adequately, if not brilliantly, and she sat at the desk by the garden window and worked for 2 hours in the productive silence she had always found easier to locate in hotels than anywhere else. Something about the ambient containment of a well-run property, the sense of being held without being seen. Gerald called at 8. "The document package is complete," he said, without preamble, which was one of the things Eleanor had always valued about him. Ownership structure, original trust, corporate filings, the lot. All current. And the board confirmation? Signed off yesterday by 3 members. Electronic signatures, time-stamped. "She'll clean." "Good." She looked out at the garden, where the lemon trees were catching the early light. "What about the property management contract?" "Renewed last month," Gerald said. "Under the group's name, as always. The general manager here, a woman named Patricia Osei, been with the property 6 years. She knows Eleanor. She's known since she was hired." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Patricia is very good." A brief pause. "Are you ready?" Gerald asked. "Almost," she said. "I want the afternoon." She could hear him absorbing this. He had known her for 30 years and had learned, in that time, not to ask questions that had already been answered. "I'll be available when you call," he said. "I know," Eleanor said. "You always are." If this story has found you, I'd make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Margaret Reed. The best ones are still coming, and the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. The harbor ferry at 10 o'clock was a small boat with bright orange life preservers, and a retired history teacher named Carl, who served as unofficial guide, standing at the bow with the wind in his gray jacket and a level of knowledge about Fort Sumter that was, Eleanor thought, genuinely impressive. Lily stood beside him for most of the crossing, asking questions in the rapid, sequential way she asked questions when she was genuinely interested. Each answer producing the next question, the chain of them extending out toward a horizon she intended to reach. Eleanor sat at the stern and watched her granddaughter with the specific pleasure of watching someone become more fully themselves than they were an hour ago. The harbor was wide and silver in the morning light. The city behind them receded in the way cities do from water, into something legible and human-scaled, its centuries visible all at once. Simone had not come. "We have brunch plans with Brad and Courtney," she had said at breakfast, without particular apology. Nathan had looked, briefly, at Lily's face when the news was delivered, and something had moved across his expression. Something Eleanor recognized as guilt, doing a quick inventory of what it would cost to correct the situation, before concluding, once again, that the cost was too high. "Have fun, pumpkin," he had said. Lily had looked at Eleanor, and Eleanor had held out her hand, and they had gone. On the island, the fort received them with the particular gravity of places where large things happened a long time ago. Lily moved through it with focused intensity, reading every placard, examining every archway, crouching to look at the seam where old brick met older mortar. Carl followed her with the devoted attention of a man who has found the most interested visitor of his week. Eleanor walked beside her when Lily wanted company, and gave her room when she wanted to look closely at something. She had always understood, with Lily, that the greatest gift was not guidance, but presence. Not directing what the child saw, but being there while she saw it. At the edge of the fort's parapet, looking back across the harbor at the city, Lily said, "This is what was worth fighting for." "Yes," Eleanor said, even though it was terrible. "Yes, because it mattered." Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, at the profile of a child turned toward the horizon, with the complete seriousness of someone who has just assembled something important. "Yes," she said, because it mattered. They ate lunch on the ferry back, sandwiches from a bag Eleanor had packed, and Lily talked about the masonry techniques the fort's builders had used, and Eleanor listened, and the harbor moved under them, and for the duration of the crossing, Eleanor felt the particular and sustaining peace of being, for a finite and precious time, exactly where she was supposed to be. She knew by the time they returned to the hotel at 2 in the afternoon that the afternoon would be the last quiet one. It was not one thing that told her. It was the accumulation of small signals she had been trained, by decades of managing complex situations in real time, to read correctly. The way Simone's voice carried from the terrace as they passed, bright and fractionally too bright, the brightness of a woman managing an impression that has become slightly more expensive to maintain. The way Nathan moved through the lobby toward the conference room with the gait of a man who has received information he has not yet decided how to process. The way Brad Hollis glanced at Eleanor as she crossed the lobby and then glanced away. Not the glance of a man who has been told nothing, but the glance of a man who has been told something and is adjusting his understanding of the room accordingly. Something was moving. She could feel it the way she could feel a shift in a negotiation, not through any single word or gesture, but through the changed quality of the air. She settled Lily with a book in the library, the room with the thick walls where Ryan Park had made his phone call, and went upstairs to the annex room to change. She sat for a moment at the desk. She did not open her laptop. She did not call Gerald. She sat with her hands flat on the desk surface and looked at the garden and thought. She thought about her mother, who had pressed tablecloths at midnight in buildings other people owned. She thought about the first bank meeting, the second bank meeting, the sample book on the conference room floor. She thought about Thomas reading contracts at the kitchen table, his reading glasses pushed up his nose, and asking the questions she had already answered. She thought about Nathan at 8 years old, sitting on a construction site with her while she reviewed a framing inspection, eating a sandwich and asking, with the straightforward curiosity of a child who does not yet know what questions are too big, "Is all of this yours, Mama?" And her answer, which had been the truth, but not yet the whole truth, "It's ours, baby. Everything we build together is ours." She had believed that for a long time. She had believed it with the full force of a woman who had made something from nothing and wanted to share it. She was still deciding, even now, at this very late hour, whether she had been wrong to believe it or simply early. She stood up. She smoothed her jacket. She looked in the mirror on the back of the annex room door, a mirror she had specified for that location, in a meeting in 2015, because she believed that guests should be able to see themselves properly before they left a room. She looked at herself for a moment. 67 years old. Her mother's cheekbones. Her father's hands. 35 years of a quietly enormous life, worn with the composure of a woman who has never needed the room to know her in order to know herself. Then she went downstairs. It was 4:15 on a Saturday afternoon when Eleanor Voss walked through the main lobby of the Callaway Grand Charleston for the 32nd time since the hotel had opened in 1999, and for the first time with a purpose that had nothing to do with the property's operations and everything to do with its ownership. She did not walk quickly. She had never, in her professional life, communicated urgency through speed. Urgency, she had always found, was better communicated through precision, through the quality of attention in the eyes, through the particular stillness of a person who knows exactly what they are about to do. The front desk had 2 staff members on duty. The one on the left was handling a check-in. The one on the right, a young man, early 20s, name tag reading James, looked up as she approached with the trained attentiveness of someone who has been taught to make the guest feel that their arrival at the desk is the most important thing happening in the room. "Good afternoon," James said. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to speak with your general manager," Eleanor said. "Patricia Osei, if she's available." "Of course," James said. "Can I tell her who's asking?" Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Tell her it's Eleanor Callaway," she said. "She'll know." James picked up the desk phone. He repeated the name into it. Eleanor watched him do it, watched the slight pause that followed, watched the small change that moved across his face as he listened to the response. Not alarm, not confusion. The particular recalibration of a person who has just been given information that rearranges the room. "She'll be right out," James said. His voice was unchanged, professional. But his posture had shifted by a degree that Eleanor recognized. The adjustment of someone who has just understood that what they were looking at was different from what they thought they were looking at. "Thank you," Eleanor said. She waited. She stood at the front desk of the hotel she had built and waited, in the same way she had been waiting for 26 years, for things to be ready, for moments to arrive, for people to reveal themselves completely before she decided what to do about what she had seen. She heard Patricia Osei before she saw her, the particular rhythm of footsteps that belongs to a person moving with controlled urgency, quickly but not so quickly that it shows. And then Patricia was there, coming through the door behind the desk, a woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped hair and the bearing of someone who has run a complex operation for long enough to have earned her own quiet authority. She saw Eleanor and stopped, just for a half second. Then she came around the desk and extended her hand. And the quality of the handshake, firm, direct, the handshake of one professional greeting another, told the small story that Eleanor had wanted told. "Mrs. Callaway," Patricia said, "it's wonderful to see you. I didn't know you were in the property. I've been here since Thursday," Eleanor said. "I apologize for not announcing myself. I wanted a few days of just being a guest." "Of course," Patricia said, and the of course had in it the warmth of a woman who understood exactly why the owner of a hotel might occasionally want to see it from the other side of the counter. "Is there something I can do for you?" "Several things," Eleanor said. But first, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to sit down. As many as you need, Patricia said. She gestured toward the manager's office, tucked behind the concierge station. The door that most guests never noticed was a door at all. As Eleanor moved to follow her, she became aware of something at the edge of her field of vision, a stillness at the terrace entrance that had not been there a moment ago. She did not look toward it directly. She did not need to. She knew the sound of a person stopping suddenly, because something they have seen has required them to stop. She did not turn around. She followed Patricia into the office, and the door closed behind them, with the soft, certain sound of very well-made things settling into place. What happened in Patricia Ossie's office in the next 40 minutes did not, in itself, change anything. The documents already existed. The ownership structure had been established for decades. The trust had been administered without interruption through 3 presidential administrations and a global pandemic, and the death of Thomas Voss, and the marriage of Nathan Voss, and the birth of Lily Voss, who was now 8 years old and sitting in the library reading about fort construction, and did not yet know that the hotel she was sitting in belonged, in its entirety, to her grandmother. What happened in Patricia's office was simply the return of a thing to its proper visibility. The confirmation of a name to a face in a room. The professional conversation between an owner and the manager who had served the property well for 6 years and who deserved, Eleanor had decided, to have the full picture before anyone else in the building did. "You've done excellent work here," Eleanor told her, meaning it with the specific completeness of someone who has been watching closely and arrived at a considered conclusion. "The property is in better condition than it was 3 years ago. The staff culture is right. The renovation held up exactly as I hoped." Patricia received this with the particular quality of someone who has been doing good work in semi-obscurity and finds, now, that the recognition arriving is real rather than performed. "Thank you," she said. "This place. It matters to the people who work here. That comes from how it was built." Eleanor looked at her. "I'm going to need your support for the next few days," she said. "Nothing dramatic, nothing that disrupts the guests. But there are some things that need to be addressed, and I'd like them addressed correctly." "Of course," Patricia said. "What do you need?" Eleanor told her. Not everything, not the full shape of what was coming, but enough. The room situation, the guests in the penthouse suite, the reservation under Eleanor Voss, and the room under Eleanor Voss that had been vacated at another guest's request, without the property management's formal knowledge. Patricia listened without expression, which was itself an expression, the controlled composure of a professional understanding that something has happened in her property that should not have happened, and that the correction of it begins now. "I'll have everything prepared," Patricia said. "Timeline?" "Tomorrow morning," Eleanor said. "Sunday, before checkout." Patricia nodded. "I'll be here." Eleanor stood. She straightened her jacket. She looked around Patricia's office, at the framed property photographs on the wall, the view of the garden through the window, the desk with its careful organization of the daily operational life of a place that hosted several hundred guests at a time with apparent effortlessness. "You should know," Eleanor said before she left, "that the property is in good hands. Whatever happens this weekend, that doesn't change." Patricia looked at her for a moment. "I know whose hands it's in," she said. Eleanor smiled, the particular smile of a woman who does not need to say anything more. She came back through the lobby at 5:30 to find it changed in a way that took her a moment to precisely locate. The quality of the light was the same. The stone floor, the central flowers, the bar with its late afternoon guests, all the same. But something in the arrangement of the room felt different in the way a room feels different when something invisible has shifted its center of gravity. She found it in the figure standing near the terrace entrance. Nathan, her son. He was standing with his phone in his hand, not looking at it, which was unusual enough to be its own signal. He was looking across the lobby at the door behind the concierge station, the door through which she had entered and exited 40 minutes ago. When he saw her, something moved across his face. Not anger. He didn't have enough information yet for anger. Not recognition. He didn't have enough of that yet either. It was the expression, Eleanor knew, of a man who has seen something he cannot yet classify, who is standing at the edge of a piece of understanding that hasn't yet fully arrived. She walked across the lobby toward him with the unhurried grace she had always moved with, the pace of a woman who is going somewhere and has time to get there. "Ma," Nathan said when she reached him. "Were you just Patricia's office?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "What was—" He stopped, recalibrated. "Is everything okay? With your room, I mean. Did you have a complaint?" Eleanor looked at her son, at the broad shoulders and the careful eyes, and the man who had stood at his father's grave, and held her hand, and told her he would take care of things. She looked at him for long enough that he became slightly uncomfortable, which was not her intention, but was the natural result of being looked at, really looked at, by someone who sees you clearly. "Everything is fine, Nathan," she said. "I was just introducing myself." He frowned. "Introducing yourself? To Patricia? You haven't met before?" "Not in this context," Eleanor said. She continued across the lobby before he could ask what that meant. She felt his eyes on her back, puzzled, slightly unsettled, the look of a man standing at the edge of a question he can't quite form. She went to the library. She collected her granddaughter, who had filled 4 pages of a small notebook with facts about Civil War fortifications and wanted to show Eleanor every one of them. "Look at this part," Lily said, pointing to a sketch she had made of a brick archway. "I drew it from memory. Is it right?" Eleanor looked at the drawing. It was right. Better than right. It had the proportions accurate and the sense of depth, the way old brick carries shadow into its seams. "It's very good," Eleanor said. "You have a feel for structure. Is that good?" "It's the most useful thing you can have," Eleanor said. "A feel for what holds." Lily looked at her grandmother with the steady attention she always brought to things she understood were significant, even when she wasn't certain why. "Grandma," she said, "something is happening, isn't it?" Eleanor looked at her. 8 years old. Her great-grandfather, Henry's eyes. Her great-grandmother, Ruth's precision. "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "Something is happening. Is it good?" Eleanor set her hand gently on top of her granddaughter's and looked out through the library window at the garden, at the lemon trees in their terracotta pots, at the fountain that a 24-year-old sculptor had made in Athens, Georgia, 20 years ago, and that still made people stop walking. "It is for us," she said. Dinner that Saturday evening was at the hotel restaurant again. The group was larger, all 8 of them, plus one additional colleague of Brad's who had materialized over the course of the afternoon. The table was the same long terrace arrangement, the same geography. Simone and Brad at the social center, Nathan across from the business conversation he needed to have, Eleanor and Lily at the far end. The difference tonight was invisible to everyone except Eleanor. It lived in the quality of Patricia Osie's attention when she stopped at the table, the owner's choice, not the routine manager's greeting, and addressed the table warmly and addressed Eleanor, specifically, with a Mrs. Calloway. "I trust everything is to your satisfaction this evening," that was delivered in the natural tone of professional courtesy and landed on the table like a small stone dropped into still water. Simone looked up. "Calloway?" she said, with the particular bright precision of a woman who has heard something she wants to examine. "They keep calling you that. Isn't your name Voss?" "Voss is my married name," Eleanor said. "Calloway is my family name. The hotel staff sometimes uses it." "That's funny," Simone said, her attention sharpening behind the social warmth she kept carefully in place. Why would the staff know your family name?" "Hotels keep detailed guest records," Eleanor said pleasantly. "They're very thorough here." She returned to her food. She did not look at Nathan, who had gone very still at the center of the table. She did not look at Patricia, who had moved on to the next table with the practiced discretion of a woman who has planted a seed and knows exactly how long it takes to grow. She looked at Lily, who was watching her with the expression of someone watching a card player who has not yet shown their hand. "You're going to tell me when I'm older," Lily said quietly. "Some of it," Eleanor said. "Yes." Lily nodded. She picked up her fork. She ate her dinner with the composure of an 8-year-old who has decided, for reasons she understands imperfectly but feels completely, to trust the person sitting beside her. Ways outside, the Cooper River moved in the dark the way it had moved for 400 years, indifferent to the small arrangements of human beings on its banks, carrying everything forward, whether or not anyone had planned for it. Inside, Eleanor ate her food and let the evening develop, and watched the small hairline crack she had opened, running quietly through the surface of the world her son had built on assumptions that were about to be tested. She was in no hurry. She had been waiting for this for a long time, and she had learned, from her mother, from the conference room floor, from 35 years of building something in the particular silence of a woman who does not need to be seen to know her own worth, that the best moves are the ones no one sees coming until they have already arrived. Late the evening ended the way evenings end before the world changes, with the surface intact and everything underneath it already in motion. Sunday morning arrived in Charleston the way October mornings arrive on the Carolina coast, when the season has finally committed to itself, cool and clear and carrying the particular light that makes old stone look like it was built specifically for this moment, this hour, this angle of the sun. The kind of light that makes a person feel, if they are standing in it with the right amount of openness, that the world has arranged itself into something legible. Eleanor was dressed before 7, not dressed in the sense of presentable. She was always presentable, had been presentable every day since she arrived, had dressed with the quiet care she brought to all things, the care that Simone had mistaken for an old woman's vanity rather than what it was. The discipline of someone who understands that how you present yourself in the moments before a decision lands tells you, and everyone watching, something about what kind of person you have been all along. She dressed in the good suit, the one she had brought from Savannah in the larger of the two bags, hanging it carefully so it would not crease, waiting for this morning without planning this morning, simply knowing, with the certainty of someone who has run many long operations, that there would be a morning that required it. The suit was deep charcoal, her mother's pearl earrings, her own watch, simple and reliable. The shoes she had bought in Savannah 6 years ago from a cobbler on Broughton Street, who had looked at her feet and the way she stood and made her something that would last, because that was what she asked for. She stood at the annex room window and looked at the garden for a long moment. The lemon trees, the fountain, the oyster shell path in its herringbone pattern, already raked by someone who arrived before dawn to maintain the standard. Then she went to brunch. The Sunday brunch at the Callaway Grand Charleston was not an accident. Eleanor had conceived it in 2002, during the property's 3rd year of operation, when the weekend occupancy numbers told her that guests were leaving the hotel between checkout and their afternoon departures without anywhere to go. That felt like a proper conclusion to their stay. She had wanted something that would hold them, not trap them, not extract more money from them, but genuinely hold them, the way a good meal holds people at a table past the point when the food has ended, because they do not want the thing they are part of to be over. The result was a brunch that ran from 8 until 1, on the south-facing terrace when the weather allowed, and in the high-ceilinged dining room when it did not. Live music, something unhurried, jazz or acoustic, never more than one instrument, so it stayed in the background where it belonged. A menu that moved between the formal and the simple, the kind of food that rewarded attention without demanding it. The champagne was optional and real, not Prosecco dressed up. She had been right about it. She was usually right about the things people needed without knowing they needed them. This morning, the terrace was already half full when Eleanor arrived at 7:40, and the musician, a man with a guitar and the unhurried quality of someone who has made peace with being background, was settled in the far corner, playing something in a minor key that felt appropriate for the light. Eleanor was shown to a table by a young woman whose name tag read Claire, who seated her with the particular warmth Eleanor recognized as Patricia's influence. Not the warmth of policy, but the warmth of a staff culture where people had been given enough respect to understand why it mattered to extend it. "So, your usual, Mrs. Calloway?" Claire said. Eleanor looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Thank you, Claire." She had not ordered from this restaurant in 3 years. She had not asked anyone to prepare her usual. But she was a guest who required care this morning, and Patricia had made certain the morning was prepared for. She sat facing the river. She ordered her tea. She watched the light change on the water and thought of nothing and everything simultaneously, in the way that is possible only for people who have been carrying a large thing for a long time and are standing at the exact moment when they are about to be able to set it down. The rest of the group arrived in stages, as groups do on the last morning of a stay, when everyone is negotiating privately between the desire to linger and the pressure of departure schedules. Lily came first, alone, still in her pajama top with a cardigan pulled over it, her hair not yet gathered. She crossed the terrace to Eleanor's table with the directness of a child who knows where she belongs and sees no reason to approach it indirectly. She sat down across from Eleanor. She put her elbows on the table. "Last day," she said. "Last day," Eleanor agreed. "I don't want to go home. I know. Do you?" Eleanor looked at her. "I'm going to Savannah," she said, "which is home, so I don't have that particular problem." Lily considered this. "Is your house in Savannah nice?" "It's very nice. Your grandfather planted things in the garden that are still growing." "Like what?" "Wisteria, some fig trees. A rose he bought for $3 at a gas station outside of Brunswick that turned out to be the most beautiful rose I've ever seen." Lily smiled at this, the specific smile of a child receiving a piece of a person they love that they have not had before. "Can I visit?" she asked. "You can visit whenever you like," Eleanor said. "You don't need to ask permission. Just tell me you're coming." "What if Mom says no?" Eleanor looked at her granddaughter steadily. "Tell me you're coming," she said again. "I'll handle the rest." Lily looked at her for a moment, processing, filing, and then nodded with the gravity of someone accepting a commitment that has been offered seriously. "Okay," she said. She picked up the menu and began reading it with the full attention she brought to everything written. Ryan Park arrived next, with Jessica beside him, the two of them carrying the easy quiet of people who have been together long enough to not require constant performance in each other's company. Ryan saw Eleanor and nodded, the nod of a person who has been thinking about something and arrived at a tentative conclusion about it. He had been thinking. Eleanor had known he was thinking since the library on Friday afternoon, since the look he had given the room when he thought no one was watching, the look of a man running a quiet calculation. He ordered coffee and opened his phone, not to scroll, but with the purposeful navigation of someone looking for something specific. Brad Hollis arrived at 8:25, Courtney immediately behind him, already talking. See, Brad had the Saturday night plus a nightcap look about him, slightly slower in his movements, the loudness at reduced volume, but his eyes were alert, which was the thing about Brad that Eleanor had noticed from the beginning. Whatever else he was always alert to information that might matter to him professionally. He sat down. He ordered a mimosa. He opened his phone with the same purposeful energy as Ryan, and Eleanor watched the two men across the table doing the same thing without appearing to coordinate it, and she understood what was happening with the clarity of a woman who has spent her career reading rooms. They had been talking, probably last night, after dinner, probably about the hotel, because that was what Brad did with places. He assessed them. He thought about their potential as client referrals or partnership opportunities. He did the due diligence that was the only mode of engagement he knew how to bring to any interesting space. And at some point in that conversation, someone had looked up the Callaway Grand. Eleanor lifted her teacup. She drank. She looked at the river. She was in no hurry at all. Nathan and Simone arrived together at 8:40. Simone had made the effort, fully dressed, full composure. the presentation of a woman who treats the last morning of a hotel stay as a performance she owes herself. Nathan had made a different kind of effort, the effort of a man who has not fully slept and is pretending with moderate success that this is not the case. He had the look she recognized from the lobby yesterday, the look of something arriving at the edge of understanding without yet having enough information to complete the crossing. They sat at the table that had assembled itself around Eleanor. Lily, across from her grandmother, Ryan and Jessica to one side, Brad and Courtney to the other, the natural geometry of a group that has spent 3 days together and found its configuration. Nathan sat beside Lily. Simone took the seat at the end, from which she could see the full table and the terrace and the approaching water view, the instinctive positioning of a woman who always wants to know what is coming. For a few minutes, it was simply breakfast. Food was ordered. Coffee arrived. Brad made a joke about the night before that produced polite laughter from everyone except Ryan, who was still looking at his phone, and Eleanor, who had the particular quality of stillness she maintained when she was watching something develop. It was Brad who broke it open. Of course it was Brad. He was the kind of man who cannot hold information he finds interesting. It pressed against the inside of him until it found a way out. "So?" he said, setting his phone face down on the table with the performance of a man about to deliver something. "I have to ask, because I looked this up last night and I can't stop thinking about it." He looked around the table, the practiced pause of a man who has told stories before and knows the value of a beat. "Nathan, did you know this hotel is part of a 14-property group?" Nathan looked up from his coffee. "Sure," he said. "It's a boutique chain. The Callaway Group, I think." "Right," Brad said. "The Callaway Group. Founded 1988. Savannah, Georgia." He picked up his phone. "According to everything I can find, which is not a lot because this company keeps a very low profile, deliberately low, it seems like, the founder is a woman named E.M. Callaway." He paused. Eleanor May Callaway. The table did not go quiet immediately. It went quiet in stages, the way a room goes quiet when information is arriving that people need a moment to process. Ryan set his coffee cup down. Jessica looked up from her plate. Courtney's expression shifted into something between curiosity and the dawning of something larger. Simone went absolutely still. Nathan frowned. He looked at Brad. He looked at his phone. He looked across the table at his mother, who was drinking her tea and watching the river, and had the expression of a woman who is somewhere very familiar. "That's," Nathan started. Stopped. That's a coincidence. "Callaway is your maiden name," Simone said. Her voice was perfectly level, the level of a woman applying extreme pressure to her own composure. She was looking at Eleanor with an expression that was making its way through surprise and arriving somewhere much more complicated. Eleanor set down her teacup. She looked at Simone, then at Nathan. She looked at her son with the full, uncomplicated, clear-eyed attention she had been giving to things that mattered for 67 years. "Not a coincidence," she said. What happened in the next 30 seconds at that table on the terrace of the Callaway Grand Charleston was not dramatic in the way that movies make moments dramatic. There was no gasp, no overturned glass, no theatrical gesture. What happened was this. The air changed. The quality of everyone's attention shifted, the way the quality of light shifts when a cloud moves, and the thing you were looking at is suddenly illuminated differently and reveals itself to have been something other than what you thought. Nathan said, "Ma." Just that. One syllable. The syllable of a man standing at the edge of a very large piece of understanding and not yet willing to step onto it. "The hotel is yours," Simone said. It was not a question. Her voice had the particular flatness of someone whose internal calculation has arrived at a number they were not prepared for. "The property is held in trust," Eleanor said, "part of the Callaway Group, which my attorney Gerald Whitmore has administered since 2001. The group currently holds 14 properties across the southeastern United States." She paused for the exact amount of time it took for that sentence to settle. "This is the flagship." The silence at the table had weight. Brad Hollis, who was not a man accustomed to silence, sat with his phone still in his hand and said nothing for the first time all weekend, which was itself a form of testimony. Ryan Park looked at Eleanor with the expression of a man confirming what he had suspected since Friday afternoon in the library, when he had looked at the room and felt something in it that he hadn't been able to name precisely. He said nothing. His saying nothing was the most eloquent thing at the table. 14 properties, Courtney said softly, the words arriving with the careful quality of someone doing arithmetic they weren't asked to do but cannot stop. Nathan was looking at his mother. His face had gone through several things in quick succession and arrived at something Eleanor recognized with the deep, aching familiarity of a woman who has watched someone she loves understand something they should have understood a long time ago. It was not anger. It was not shame, not quite. It was the specific expression of a man encountering the gap between the story he has told himself about his own life and the actual dimensions of what his life has been. "You never said," he said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "I didn't." "Why?" Eleanor looked at her son. The broad shoulders and his father's precision, and the eyes that had looked at her, at 8 years old, on a construction site with a sandwich in his hand, and asked, "Is all of this yours, Mama?" "Because I wanted to see," she said, "who you would be when you thought there was nothing to inherit." The table was very quiet. Lily, beside her father, was looking at her grandmother. Her expression was not surprise. It was the expression Eleanor had come to know as Lily's face. For I suspected this, and now I know. The expression of a child who pays attention and sometimes arrives at conclusions before the adults around her because she has not yet learned to look away from the things that make her uncomfortable. "The house built in 1790 is still standing," Lily said quietly. Eleanor looked at her. "Yes," she said, "it is. Because it was built well. Yes." No one else at the table fully understood this exchange. It was not intended for anyone else at the table. Simone recovered first. This was not surprising. Simone's reflexes in high-stakes social situations were excellent, finely tuned by years of managing the gap between what was actually happening and what she needed people to believe was happening. She recovered with the swiftness of someone who has assessed the landscape in real time and understood that the posture she had maintained for 4 years was no longer viable, and that the question now was only how to reposition. "Eleanor," she said, and the warmth was back, but it had a different quality now, less proprietary, more careful. The warmth of a woman recalibrating the terms of a relationship she suddenly understood she had misread. "We didn't know. If we had known, the room situation, asking you to. The room is not the point," Eleanor said pleasantly. "Of course not," Simone said too quickly. "I only meant, I know what you meant," Eleanor said. She said it without edge, without performance, with the simple clarity of a woman who has been listening carefully for a long time and has no need to pretend otherwise. Simone heard it the way it was intended to be heard, which was completely, and she closed her mouth. Nathan was still looking at his mother. He had the look of a man who has more to say than he has language for, the look of someone standing at the beginning of a very long conversation he does not know how to start. "The lobby," he said. "You said, when I texted you, you suggested I sleep on the couch," Eleanor said. The word LOL was not one she chose to include. She did not need to. "Yes." Something moved across Nathan's face that was not simple. It was the complex movement of a man encountering, all at once, the accumulation of things he had chosen not to examine. The text, the room, the quiet days his mother had spent in the annex, the way she had sat at the far end of every table without complaint, the years of holidays growing shorter, of calls migrating to Simone's voice, of conversations redirected before they completed themselves. All of it, arriving at once, with the weight of something that has been carried by someone else for a very long time and has just been set on the table for the person who should have been carrying it to see. "I'm sorry, Ma," Nathan said. The words were quiet and genuine. Eleanor looked at her son for a long moment, not to make him uncomfortable, not to extend the reckoning, but because she wanted to see them clearly, wanted to be sure they were what they appeared to be, before she decided what to do with them. They were. He meant them. "I know you are," she said. Patricia Osei appeared at the edge of the terrace at 9:15, as she and Eleanor had arranged. Not interrupting, not announcing herself, simply present in the way that the best managers are present, available without imposing. She made brief eye contact with Eleanor, who gave the smallest nod, and Patricia crossed the terrace with the composed authority of a woman who has run this property for 6 years and knows every inch of it and every person in it. She set a single envelope on the table in front of Eleanor. "Your documents for the week, Mrs. Calloway," she said, "and the management report you requested." "Thank you, Patricia," Eleanor said. Patricia looked at the table, at Nathan, at Simone, at Brad Hollis, with his phone still frozen in his hand, with the measured expression of a professional who is not performing anything but whose presence is itself a form of statement. Then she excused herself and returned to her work. The envelope sat on the table. Eleanor did not open it. She did not need to open it. She knew what was in it, had reviewed it in the annex room that morning, had confirmed every number, every property, every figure that represented the 35 years of quiet, accumulated, see invisible work she had done while being handed plates through pass-throughs and seated at the far end of tables, and texted messages that suggested the lobby couch. Brad Hollis was looking at the envelope with the expression of a man recalibrating everything. Ryan Park was looking at Eleanor with something that had moved past curiosity into something closer to recognition, the recognition of a person who has encountered, unexpectedly, someone operating at a level they had not been told to expect. 14 properties, Brad said again, under his breath, the way a person says something they are still adjusting to. 14, Eleanor confirmed. The 16th breaks ground in Beaufort next spring. She did not deliver a speech. She had never, in her professional life, delivered a speech in a moment that did not require one. And this moment did not require one. The truth was already in the room, had arrived through channels she had not needed to manage directly. The documents existed. Patricia Osei had spoken her name. Brad Hollis had done his research. The river was still outside the window, and the stone floor was still the color of sand that has been rained on and dried again, and the flowers were fresh, and the staff was moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had been working for an owner who treated them with respect for 24 years. What the truth required now was not amplification. It required a response. And Eleanor's response was, as it had always been, precise and proportional, and delivered without theater. She spoke to Nathan first. Not at the table. Not in front of Brad's calculations and Simone's recalibrations and the particular attention of people who had a professional interest in what was happening. She asked Nathan to walk with her, and they went to the south-facing terrace railing where the river was closest, and she told him what she needed to tell him. She told him about the Calloway Group, the full history, not the details he might find in a public filing, but the private history, the origin, the construction site on the outskirts of Savannah, where his father had sat with her on a Thursday evening, while the investors finished reviewing the numbers that would decide whether the first property was possible. She told him about Ruth Calloway and the tablecloths and the name on the company that was not an accident. She told him about the trust, about Gerald, so about the restructuring that had moved her name off every public document, and she told him why, which was the part she had never told anyone outside of Gerald and Thomas. She told him because he was her son and he deserved the honest version of the story he had been living inside of without knowing it. And then she told him about the test. Not cruelly, not with the satisfaction of a woman who has won something, because she had not felt, at any point in this weekend, that she was winning. Winning was not the right word for what she felt. The right word was something closer to finished, the specific feeling of someone who has carried something to its conclusion and can now set it down. I needed to see who you would be, she said, when you believed there was nothing to inherit, when there was no incentive to be kind. Nathan was quiet for a long time. The river moved below them. And, he said finally, you let Simone take my room, Eleanor said, and you texted me to sleep on the couch, and you stood in that kitchen in Atlanta 2 years ago and watched me eat the food Tiffany put on the wrong plate and said nothing. She paused. And you looked at your watch instead of looking at me. Nathan did not argue. He had, she thought, grown into at least this much. He no longer argued with things he knew to be true. But, Eleanor continued, and this was the word she had been holding, the word the weekend had been building toward, you also came to every dinner. You held Lily's hand when she was scared of the thunder Friday night. I heard you through the wall. You asked me, twice, if the annex room was comfortable enough. You said you were sorry this morning, and you meant it. She looked at her son. You are not a bad man, Nathan. You are a man who has been choosing the easier thing for too long, and I think you know the difference. He looked at the river for a long time. What happens now? He said. That depends entirely on you, she said. Not on Simone, not on Brad Hollis and whatever partnership he has on offer. On you. She looked at him directly. The group will eventually need the kind of oversight that comes from inside the family. Gerald is 71. These are not decisions I can make forever. She paused. But I will not hand something I spent 35 years building to a man who needs his mother to make his choices for him. So the question is not what happens now. The question is who you decide to be next. Nathan looked at her. The look of a man who has received something he did not earn, and knows it, and is trying to determine, for the first time in a long time, what he intends to do with the knowledge. Give me time to figure that out, he said. You have it, Eleanor said. You've always had it. I've been waiting for you to use it. The conversation with Simone was shorter. Eleanor did not seek it out. She did not have to. Simone found her in the lobby at 11, bags already arranged by the door, with the organization of a woman who is managing a departure, the outer composure restored, and the inner architecture of the morning still settling. I owe you an apology, Simone said. Direct, which Eleanor respected, even in this context. More than one. Yes, Eleanor said. I thought I understood the situation. I know. I was wrong about... You were wrong about what I was, Eleanor said, but you were not wrong about who you were. That's the part worth thinking about. Simone was quiet for a moment. The performance was gone, not because Eleanor had removed it, but because the room no longer required it to function. Without the performance, Simone's face had a different quality. Younger, slightly uncertain, the face of a woman who has built so much of her life on the management of other people's perceptions that she has occasionally lost track of her own. Will you? She started. That's between you and Nathan, Eleanor said. I'm not part of that calculation. I never should have been. She walked past Simone toward the terrace, where Lily was waiting. Having organized herself for departure with the practical efficiency of a child who does not want to leave, but has accepted that she must. Lily was standing at the railing with her notebook, making a final sketch of the river view. She did not look up immediately when Eleanor arrived, finishing a line with the concentration of someone who needs to complete the thing before she can be present for the next thing. Then she looked up. She studied Eleanor's face with the quiet attention she brought to important things. Are you okay? She asked. I'm very okay, Eleanor said. Did they understand? They understood what they needed to understand. What about what they didn't need to understand? Eleanor looked at her granddaughter. 8 years old. Henry Calloway's eyes. Ruth Calloway's precision. The particular quality of attention that would, Eleanor was certain, with the certainty of someone who has watched people become themselves for 67 years, make this child someone worth watching. I'll explain the rest when you're older, Eleanor said. You keep saying that, Lily said, without accusation, simply noting it. Because it keeps being true, Eleanor said. Lily accepted this. She looked at the river one more time, committing it to some private record she was keeping. Then she closed her notebook and turned to her grandmother with the full weight of her attention. Can I come to Savannah for Thanksgiving? She asked. Yes. And see the wisteria? It's dormant in November, but it's still beautiful. Your grandfather always said it was best in winter. You can see the structure of it when the leaves are gone. Lily turned this over. Like a fort, she said. Exactly like a fort, Eleanor said, all the strength visible. She held her granddaughter's hand, and they stood together at the railing for a few more minutes, the two of them looking at the river that moved below them with the indifference of something that has been here longer than any of the arrangements of human beings on its banks, and will be here long after those arrangements have concluded. Eleanor left the Callaway Grand at noon on a Sunday in October. In a Volvo she had driven herself from Savannah, with a folder of documents in the glove compartment and her mother's recipe book on the passenger seat. She had brought it with her, as she brought it everywhere, was because she had never stopped finding comfort in the presence of a thing that had been handled by hands she loved. She did not stop at the front desk to check out. Patricia had arranged it. She did not go through the lobby. She walked through the garden, the lemon trees, the fountain, the herringbone path, and through the service entrance she had used 100 times before she had ever used the front door, and she got into her car and drove south. The drive from Charleston to Savannah took 2 hours and some minutes on a clear day. Eleanor did not listen to the audiobook on the return. She drove in silence, which was its own kind of sound, the sound of a decision that has been made and landed and does not need to be revisited, the particular quiet of a woman who has put something down that she had been carrying for a very long time. She thought about Thomas. She thought about what he would have said, probably something brief and precise and accurate, delivered from behind a set of reading glasses at the kitchen table with the contract spread out in front of him. She thought he would have said something like, "You gave them every chance to be who you raised them to be," and she thought that was probably right. She had. She had given the chances with patience and with love, and with the full cost of what patience costs when it is extended by someone who could afford to stop being patient at any time and has chosen not to. She crossed the bridge into Savannah at 2 in the afternoon, with the low coastal light coming through the driver's side window, and the city received her the way it always had, with the Spanish moss and the wide streets, and the particular quality of ease that a city acquires when it has been beautiful for long enough to stop trying. She drove to the house. She let herself in. She stood in the foyer for a moment, in the silence of a house that has been lived in with care for a very long time, and carries that care in its walls the way good stone carries warmth. Then she went to the kitchen. She set the recipe book on the counter, opened to the peach cobbler page, the 100-year-old recipe in Ruth Calloway's handwriting, the script slightly faded, the measurements in the imprecise language of a woman who cooked by feel rather than formula. She read it the way she always read it, not for instruction but for company. She made the cobbler. She made it the way she always made it, with the patience the recipe required, and the particular attention she brought to things that mattered. The kitchen filled with the smell of peaches and brown sugar, and the faint, warm scent of something old being made present again. She ate alone at the kitchen table, in the house Thomas had helped her buy with a down payment they had been saving for 7 years. She ate with the window open, the garden visible, the wisteria along the fence in its late autumn structure, all the strength visible, as she had told Lily when the leaves are gone. Nathan called at 4. She let it ring twice before answering. "I did some reading," he said, "after you left. About the group, about the Beaufort property." A pause. "I called Gerald." "I know," Eleanor said. "He told me. He said he'd been waiting for me to call for 3 years. He's a patient man." "Ma!" A longer pause. The quality of a man standing at the beginning of something he intends, this time, to approach with the care it deserves. "I have a lot of work to do." "Yes," she said. "I'm going to do it." She looked out at the garden, at the wisteria with its winter structure, at the fig trees Thomas had planted in 1994, which were older now and more fruitful than they had been when they were young, which was the way of things planted in good ground with enough time. "I know you are," she said. "Call me when you have questions." "And when I don't?" "Call me then too," she said. "I'd like to hear your voice more often. Not Simone's, yours." A silence that was not empty. The silence of a man filing something he intends to act on. "Okay," Nathan said. "Okay, Ma." She hung up. She sat with her hands flat on the kitchen table in the good evening light and felt, in the place behind her sternum where the important things lived, the particular feeling she had been moving toward for a very long time. Not triumph. Triumph was too loud for what this was. Not relief. Relief implied that she had been afraid, which was not quite right either. It was something closer to resolution. The feeling of a thing completed. The feeling of a woman who has built what she intended to build, tested what she needed to test, and arrived, at 67, at the morning on the other side of the long work, with her mother's recipe book on the counter, her husband's garden outside the window, and her granddaughter coming to Savannah for Thanksgiving. She was not finished. She had never been the kind of person who finished. There were 15 properties now, and a 16th breaking ground in Beaufort in the spring, and Gerald was 71, and the trust needed attention, and the world kept presenting problems worth solving. She was not finished. But she was, for the first time in a long time, exactly where she had always intended to end up. At her own table, in her own light, having decided what her life would mean, not waiting for anyone else to decide it for her. She closed the recipe book and looked at the garden. The wisteria was bare of leaves, all the strength visible. This is what they missed. The ones who confused her patience for weakness. They missed that the patience was the strength, that the silence was the strategy, that the woman sitting at the far end of every table, eating her food without complaint, all watching every room with the careful attention of someone who knows exactly what they are looking at. That woman was never diminished by what they did to her. She was deciding. She was always deciding. And when she had seen enough, when she had waited long enough, when the morning finally arrived that required the good suit and the pearl earrings and the 4 words that rearranged everything, she was ready. She had always been ready. They just hadn't known what they were looking at. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated, and we tell those stories here. Prusha.